The hallways of Jefferson High pulsed with energy every afternoon. Lockers slammed shut like a percussion line, sneakers squeaked against the waxed linoleum, and laughter rolled in waves from one end of the corridor to the other. Teenagers carried backpacks weighed down with textbooks, phones buzzed in their hands, and cliques clustered in corners, each group carving out their little kingdom in the crowded passageways. On the surface, it looked like any ordinary school day, the chaos predictable and routine. But buried within that noise was a sharpness, the type of tension that sparks whenever a group of bullies decides it's time to choose their target. For months now, the target had been Darius. Darius was 16, tall for his age but not filled out like the athletes who strutted through the halls in Letterman jackets. His frame was lean, his skin a deep brown, his hair cropped close, and his eyes carried a seriousness that seemed older than his years. He wasn't the type to crack jokes loudly in class or command attention at lunch tables. He kept to himself, usually with books in his hands and earbuds tucked in. That quietness, that lack of show, made him invisible to most. But to a few, it made him prey. 3 boys in particular had taken it upon themselves to remind Darius of his supposed place. They shoved him into lockers for the fun of it, snatched things from his hands, and whispered names they thought would stick. Their favorite trick was to humiliate him in front of others, hoping the laughter of a crowd would add weight to their cruelty. To them, Darius was the perfect victim, different, quiet, and unwilling to lash out. What they didn't know, what no one at Jefferson High even suspected, was that Darius carried a secret life outside those walls. After school, while others went to football practice or video games, Darius trained. His sanctuary was a small, unremarkable gym at the edge of town, where the smell of sweat mixed with the sharp tang of disinfectant and leather. There, under the eye of a stern but patient coach, he had been practicing mixed martial arts for nearly 4 years. It wasn't just about fighting, his coach drilled into him. It was about discipline, control, respect for his opponent, and respect for himself. Darius sparred with older fighters, worked on conditioning until his lungs burned, and repeated moves until they were second nature. To most, he was just another quiet kid. But inside the octagon, he was precise, focused, and dangerous in ways no one could see from the outside. That contrast, invisible at school, unstoppable in the gym, defined him. Most days, he kept those 2 worlds separate. But sometimes life pushes a person into a corner, and the line between those worlds blurs. It happened on a gray Thursday afternoon. The air outside was thick with humidity, and the hallways felt more restless than usual. Students pushed toward the exits, eager for freedom, their voices a rising tide. Darius walked with his usual calm, his books pressed neatly against his chest. His headphones hung around his neck, the faint hum of music bleeding from them. He wasn't expecting trouble, but trouble had been waiting for him. The 3 boys were leaning against the lockers midway down the hall, watching, waiting. As Darius drew closer, one of them straightened with a grin that promised cruelty. With a flick of his hand, he smacked the books from Darius's arms. Pages scattered, papers fluttered across the floor, and the sound of laughter echoed sharply against the lockers. Students slowed, eyes turning, waiting to see what would unfold. "Look at him," one of the bullies sneered, his tone dripping with mockery. Another leaned in, whispering something cruel about his clothes, his skin, his silence. Then came the shove, sharp and deliberate, sending Darius stumbling against a locker with a hollow clang. For a heartbeat, everything froze. Darius bent down slowly, picking up one page, his face unreadable. To the bullies, it looked like submission, like the same routine they'd enjoyed before. But inside, something had shifted. He stood up, his jaw tight, his eyes locked on the ringleader. It wasn't rage that filled them, but something far more unsettling. Focus. He placed his books carefully against the locker, rolled his shoulders back, and planted his feet. The movement was small, subtle, but it carried power. A ripple went through the crowd. Some students leaned in, sensing this wasn't going to be the usual outcome. The ringleader, still grinning, shoved him again, harder. But Darius didn't stumble this time. He absorbed the force, his balance rooted, his body coiled with controlled energy. A murmur spread through the hall. And then, with a movement so sharp and practiced it seemed unreal, Darius stepped forward. His leg swept low, hooking behind the bully's ankles, and with a twist of his hips, the bigger boy crashed to the ground in a blur of motion. Gasps filled the air. Phones rose instantly, recording. The bully scrambled, stunned, but before he could rise, Darius had him pinned effortlessly. It wasn't anger that kept him there, but mastery. The silence that followed was deafening. The second boy lunged forward, trying to grab him. Darius pivoted smoothly, sidestepped, and drove a precise strike into the boy's midsection. Controlled, not brutal, enough to drop him to his knees, gasping for air. The third boy hesitated, his bravado crumbling. He raised his hands, muttering something under his breath, and stepped back, unwilling to test what everyone now realized. This wasn't the quiet, helpless target they thought they knew. The crowd erupted, half in cheers, half in disbelief. The same students who had laughed at Darius before were now shouting his name, their phones capturing every second. In the middle of it all, he stood tall, breathing steady, calm, his eyes locked on the bullies who had mocked him for months. What struck those watching wasn't just the power in his moves, but the control in his restraint. Darius didn't throw wild punches, didn't lose himself in anger. Every motion was measured, disciplined, purposeful. He had learned long ago that true strength isn't about destruction. It's about command. And in that moment, he commanded everything. The fight, the room, the respect of those who had doubted him. Teachers rushed into the scene, pushing through the ring of students. They demanded explanations, pulling the bullies to their feet. The boys were shaken, no longer smirking, no longer cocky. Their eyes darted everywhere but at Darius. He picked up his books calmly, slid the last paper into place, and handed one to a teacher with quiet dignity. He didn't argue. He didn't brag. He didn't need to. The truth had unfolded in front of everyone's eyes. The consequences for the bullies came swiftly. Suspensions, detentions, stern warnings. But the real punishment was the shift in the hallways afterward. No longer did they strut with confidence. No longer did they look for easy targets. And Darius, the kid they had mocked endlessly, walked the halls with a presence that spoke louder than words. Students who had never noticed him before nodded as he passed. Some whispered about his skills, others replayed the video that had gone viral within hours, but Darius himself stayed the same. He still trained at the gym every evening, still pushed himself until sweat poured down his face, still listened to his coach's lessons. He didn't let the sudden respect inflate his ego. What fueled him wasn't proving the bullies wrong. It was proving himself right, living up to the discipline he had practiced for years. And yet, late at night, he sometimes thought about the moment. The look of shock in the bully's eyes, the silence that fell when he shifted his stance. He knew many would remember that day as the fight that changed how people saw him. But for Darius, it was more than that. It was a reminder that silence is not weakness, that humility is not fear, and that every person carries strength invisible to the world until the moment it's revealed. The bullies learned a painful lesson. They had mocked him for being quiet, for looking ordinary, for not fitting their shallow mold of strength. But the truth is, appearances deceive. Beneath the janitor's mop, the factory worker's gloves, the student's bowed head, or the teenager's silence, there can live a storm waiting to rise, and when it does, it doesn't just defend, it transforms the way the world looks at you.